and we do so now. Accordingly, at its meeting held on November 19, 2020, the Cabinet agreed that the Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance should give policy direction to the National Housing Corporation to completely refund all tenants who paid monies either in full or in part towards the purchase of their units. These directions were given in accordance with Section 23 of the Housing Act, Cap 226, which states, the Minister may give directions to the Corporation as to the exercise and performance of any of its functions under this Act, and the Corporation shall give effect to such directions. It is estimated that the total cost of $5,645,700 will be refunded to 576 tenants from 21 of the NHC's 49 housing estates. In keeping with the guidelines of Barbados' Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, the BERT, persons who paid $5,000 or less will receive cash, while tenants entitled to be refunded more than $5,000 will receive bonds. As you know, these bonds may be encashed at any time at a discounted price. By our calculations, a total of 135 persons will receive cash refunds, while 441 persons will be refunded by way of bonds. Of these, 212 would have paid between $5,000 and $10,000, while a further 128 would have paid between $10,000 and $15,000. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, the difference in savings between those tenants who paid in money and those who would be receiving their units free of cost is not insignificant in the scheme of things. In fact, 11 people paid in excess of $30,000. And as a matter of interest, the highest amount paid for a unit was $45,600. Therefore, I'm very happy, especially in this festive season, to be able to bring this measure to the House. I have already instructed the National Housing Corporation to prepare the necessary paperwork so that monies and bonds can be paid by Christmas. It is my fervent wish that this can be done. It would be remiss of me, though, Mr. Speaker, if I did not say something about the National Housing Corporation Enfranchisement Program itself, which we started all those years ago, the transfer of units. At last count, on October 30th this year, the number of terrace units still to be transferred to qualifying tenants was 2,574. This is a significant number of units which the National Housing Corporation is maintaining free of charge to the tenants who no longer have to pay rents for them. But more important, the delay in transferring legal title to the tenants prevents them from using these properties as collateral to enhance their personal circumstances and otherwise fulfill their dreams. I want to assure this Honourable House, however, that this government plans to ensure that almost 100% of tenants will receive their title to their units within the next 2 years. We have already assembled a team which is working feverishly on this solution, and soon we'll be returning to this House to amend the relevant legislation to fast-track this process. 17 years since this project started is much, much too long. These tenants deserve to have the security of tenure we have promised and to exercise their full rights of ownership like everyone else. I am conscious, though, Mr. Speaker, of commitments the Corporation has given to ensure that the units are safe and secure prior to their transfer, and I wholeheartedly endorse those objectives. So, for example, within the last year, the government has spent $2.23 million to upgrade the electrical work in 313 units, particularly in the building estates at Haynesville, Thorpes, and Bagatelle. This was a pilot program which the National Housing Corporation has since expanded by engaging the services of an additional 11 electrical contractors to carry out similar work on various housing estates. I wholeheartedly endorse these objectives. So, for example, within the last year, this government has spent $2.23 million to upgrade the electrical network in 313 units, particularly in the building estates at Haynesville, Thorpes, and Bagatelle. This was a pilot project which the NHC has expanded by engaging the services of an additional 11 contractors to carry out similar work on various housing estates. Work relating to the electrical upgrades commenced at Ferniehurst, Rosemont Estates earlier this month. The board has indicated that approximately 500 units will be upgraded annually over the next 5 years, but because of the timelines we have set ourselves for the transfer of units, I have challenged the NHC to double that output. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to report that the National Housing Corporation has made steady progress in refurbishing its wells and sewage systems in order to make the surroundings more wholesome and safe for the tenants and Barbadians as a whole. During the third quarter of 2019, the National Housing Corporation was tasked to carry out the sewage systems refurbishment program at an initial cost of $2 million. Under this program, critical repair work has been undertaken and unsafe or unsanitary sewage systems in at least 10 housing estates. A total of 135 of the most critical sewage systems, wells and septic tanks, were identified for rehabilitation. As at October 31st this year, 73 sewage systems had been rehabilitated at a cost of $1,706,475. We still have our challenges with the work, Mr. Speaker, because it is painstaking and messy work, much of which has been neglected for years. But we will stay the course and get the job done. You will be happy to know that we have established a WhatsApp number which allows tenants to report urgent complaints so that they can be addressed speedily, 266-1854. And I want to thank those several tenants who have brought urgent issues to our attention so far, and I encourage all to continue to highlight any serious problems that they may be facing in or around their units so that we can address them. We are all in this together. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of the season, I want to take this opportunity to wish all fellow Barbadians and my constituents from Christchurch West in particular, God's blessings during the season and a prosperous new year. I'm obliged to you.
Congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 2, in the name of the Honorable Prime Minister, to move the second reading of the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award Bill 2020.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of this debate, I'd like to make application to you to treat to the two bills as a cognate debate, the Barbados Humanitarian Award Bill and the National Gold Award Achievement Bill. Number 2 and number 4 on the order paper, sir.
The question is that order number 2 and number 4 be treated as a cognate debate. Given the fact that they're inextricably linked, all those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I consider my participation in this debate this morning both an honor and a privilege, but equally I'm humbled by my responsibility to speak in this debate. The bills that are before us are occasioned by extraordinary achievement on the part of perhaps one of the largest groups of persons to act in concert pursuant to a single mission, probably since independence And I say so conscious that the mission of which I speak is the protection of this nation state. There is no doubt in anyone's mind now, in December of 2020, that what the entire world has faced in this year of 2020 is comparable to only that which happened 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. With that, I bypass what our grandparents and others would refer to as the Great War. And I bypass other difficulties and challenges that we would have faced as a nation with the 1937 revolution. And you'll note I refer to it as revolution and not riots, because riots really belong to lawbreakers. A revolution belongs to nation builders. But what is significant is that for the first time in probably 100 years, the people of this nation, like others across the world, were called upon to raise defenses to protect our lives and fundamentally our nation state, our communities, our families. We were not sure where this virus was taking the world, not Barbados. We were not sure where this virus was taking the world. And as it spread, doctors and scientists were learning a little more each week. Some things they were confident about, other things they were not confident about. Does vitamin D and sunlight make a difference? Does fresh air make a difference? All kinds of speculation. What kind of therapeutics or medicines would work? Was ventilators the appropriate modality for treatment for persons presenting with it? Or is it now that we look at other forms of treatment rather than ventilators as the first rush to modality? All of these things were just whirling all around us. And we had to navigate our way through the fog, while at the same time ensuring that the basic needs of human life could be met day by day by day by day as we confronted this reality. Mr. Speaker, I vaguely remembered around New Year's Day hearing something about some unusual virus that they were looking at in China. And I put it at the back of my head, and every few days I kept trying to listen to see what I could hear. Because like with SARS and other viruses that went before, MERS, all of them, you knew that it had potential to do great damage. But like with most, I think there was a general feeling that the world would contain the spread as it had successfully done with Ebola, as it had successfully done with SARS. Historians will spend inordinate amounts of time in the future trying to understand why this one went rogue as compared to the other potential epidemics that would have broken out in the course of the last few decades. It is fair to say that the kind of panic that then ensued once persons realized that death could be quick for some was unparalleled in our lifetime. What did it teach us, sir? It taught us and reinforced in us something that we used to say all the time, but we now know it intrinsically and can feel it through every aspect of our body, that each one of us matters. I used it as my theme and title when we produced the white paper on education reform back in 1995. And for my entire political career, I've believed it. But I recognize that it is sometimes hard to get others to live it, to walk the walk, and not just talk the talk. But I've never seen anything else in my 55 years that has driven home the fact that each one of us matters more than this COVID pandemic. For when the time came to impose restrictions on movement, and when the time came to do that while taking care of those who were most vulnerable, and particularly with the understanding that those with comorbidities would be literally facing a moment of deep peril should they be found positive with this pandemic. And why would that bother us? Well, we all know that Barbados regrettably has had too high an incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases in our population, that we, especially with this Minister of Health, we've been trying to run a program, and I want to salute Sir Trevor Hassel and others as well, for trying to help us run a program to get people to take their well-being seriously, physical and mental, and to recognize that lives are being cut short or compromised as a result of having to fight life-threatening and debilitating diseases, the worst perhaps of which for many Barbadians is that thing called sugar, formerly known as diabetes. From amputations to blindness to dialysis to irascibility, all of those and more are the side effects with which thousands of our citizens have to contend on with respect to their lives. And what makes it even more difficult is that for you to have that, and then to find out that this thing that is enveloping the world will have a worse impact on those who have chronic NCDs, or as we have come to call it, comorbidities. It is amazing how new words enter our lexicon depending on what is happening in a society. Because none of us would have talked about comorbidities before, but now even Ninja Man will talk about it. Such is the reality of 2020. So I was making the point that 2020 taught us in a very real way that each person matters, that some of us are hardlined differently. I tell people so all the time. If you ask me to go and fix a solar water heater, you could as well say that you're dead. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know what to do. And equally, I recognize that things that I may do well as an attorney at law, others may not be able to do either. They couldn't get the first word out the mouth to stand up in court. In fact, they would be subject to what a Chief Justice did to a lawyer once, when he said, take the man from the dock away and take the man who represented him too. So that, believe you me, we know it. And we tell our children that, especially when it comes to doing the common entrance exam. But deep down, this society never really embraced it sufficiently. And I believe that 2020 will cause those of us who were alive and well to have a different perspective on the value of labor of each and every person in this world and in this country in particular. And why do I say so? Mr. Speaker, how are you going to get groceries if the ladies who go and pack the shelves were not choosing to come to work and face the risk of the pandemic every day in packing the shelves overnight so that people could eat in this country again? How would you get to the supermarket if the people who were responsible as dockers and other workers in the port were not moving the goods off of the ship? Or those who were responsible for trucking it from the port to the wholesale facility or those who continue to face the reality of fumes, noxious fumes in pumping gas and diesel for people. Because if you didn't have the fuel, the trucks couldn't move the goods. If you didn't have the fuel, in some instances where generators were required, the generators couldn't work. If you didn't have the technicians to come and fix a refrigerator that break down, all the meat and all the fish and all the cold goods spoiled. I hope members are understanding where I'm going. And you know, it is incumbent upon us to recognize that when that supermarket worker or that gas station attendant or that customs officer or that immigration officer, or of course the nurses and the orderlies and the doctors and the lab technicians and all of the allied medical professionals, which we obviously know immediately for being on the front line. But if they and all of the allied other skills, the person to open a bank because you are 78 years old and you don't have an ATM card and you're only accustomed going with your bank book to the bank, and all of a sudden now, the bank shut down too. And you got to go and stand up in a line and expose yourself. And thank God for those who were still prepared to come out on a modified basis to facilitate those persons who were either technologically incapable or technologically illiterate with respect to the conduct of their own banking businesses. But Mr. Speaker, these were the things that confronted us in April and May and June in particular in this country. And when you compound all of that with the empathy that was required and sensitivity to deal with persons who were anxious because they had lost their jobs, or anxious because they were put on short time, or incapable of doing better because they had somebody at home who was particularly and acutely vulnerable and requiring attention, while at the same time having to earn to keep food coming into the house and the light and water in the house on. These are the complexities of what many of our citizens faced. And it is significant to me, sir, that those persons who went beyond the call of duty, particularly in those early months, did not stop and ask, I can get a reward, I can get an honor, or I can get extra pay. No. What they did was to rise to the occasion, conscious that in rising to the occasion, they were defending the people of this nation. And Mr. Speaker, the people of this nation owe a significant debt of gratitude to those who stepped forward, particularly in those darkest of months, to do their job, but in doing their job, to keep this country safe and stable as we went through that period. You know, Mr. Speaker, you must forgive me for a minute if I therefore say that I find it incomprehensible that there are persons in this country in this month, in this year of our Lord, who would want now to contend that there should not be any determination by this government for the establishment of a national minimum wage to ensure that people whose work we value are properly rewarded in this country. It is incomprehensible. And especially in this year, when we know that had persons who were responsible for packing shelves and taking money at the supermarket till and dealing with cleaning the supermarkets late at night in order to ensure that persons can go back in the next morning, and cleaning took on a different meaning because of the pandemic and because of the need for sanitizing and extraordinary measures for that. And we are going to look at each other in Barbados in the year 2020, in the month of December, 10 months into a pandemic affecting our part of the world, and query whether there should be a national minimum wage. Mr. Speaker, I want to make myself very, very clear. Come April 1st, there will be a national minimum wage in Barbados. I am prepared to listen to everyone on quantum, and that is why we set up, in addition to the National Minimum Wage Board, the Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee for Cabinet. I'm prepared to listen to persons who are not in there as well. But what we cannot dispute is our need to protect those at the very bottom of the earning scale in this country, whose jobs are nevertheless critical. If the person's collecting the garbage, or the person's literally cleaning, or the person's serving gas, were not doing their jobs, what would happen in the context of this pandemic, Mr. Speaker? Study ahead. I beg you do. Study ahead. And when you study it, and we study it, we realize that that is why the reform of the common entrance exam is also so critical, because every person in this country can do the best that they can do so long as they apply their head to it. And it doesn't matter what your job is, so long as you also know how you do your job is what will distinguish you. So long as what you're doing is legal and morally correct, then it matters not, and each of us must respect persons for that. Mr. Speaker, I want to go forward, recognizing, therefore, that that motto that so exemplifies so much of what we have done in this society, trying to fight against historical tyranny over the centuries, that we are as strong as the weakest link among us, became all the more real for us in COVID-19. Sir, the bill that is before this honorable chamber, therefore, seeks to provide for persons who have given of their best, literally, who have given meritorious humanitarian service, to be recognized by this nation and to be appropriately accorded with the medal under this piece of legislation. A person, Mr. Speaker, will receive what is known as the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award, and as I've been instructed, at the top of the badge, for those who get the badges, will have the words COVID-19 inscribed on it, because it is intended that this piece of legislation can be used again for other humanitarian disasters or challenges. And we pray that we will not have to deal with them in a hurry, but our sense of history and knowledge of life causes us to recognize that these things will forever be with us, particularly in the world facing a climate crisis as it is doing. Typically, one would expect this, and the member for the city of Bridgetown, who has a long and distinguished military career, would be in a better position to speak to some of these issues than even myself. But typically, we would expect for these types of awards to be issued for people who would have provided service in the event of a mass casualty or in the event of a hurricane, the recovery efforts in trying to bring stability to a country that has been ravaged by an earthquake. And it is not limited to service here, but service on behalf of the nation wherever the nation deems it appropriate. So that if you have a lot of Barbadians living somewhere else, and we've had to send in people to rescue them or to get them offshore or whatever, then typically this is the kind of award, in addition to the gallantry and bravery awards that are available under the Order of Barbados, this would now be available. And why this? Mr. Speaker, we simply needed something that would allow us to recognize scale. Scale. My cabinet has come to know that I use that word often, because if we're going to transform a nation or to change circumstances in most things, you need to do it to scale, to ensure that the scale is appropriate to the task which confronts us. And to that extent, in Barbados in 2020, the scale of the response by those who were on the medical front line, the doctors, the nurses, the lab technicians, the orderlies, and all of the other persons, the persons feeding persons, all of the other things that we take for granted to keep a clinic or a hospital functioning. They all responded. And while I'm here, let me let the Honorable Chamber know that I was happy to receive news this morning from the member for St. Michael South Central and the representative for the European Investment Bank that the application which the government made to have all of the works that we did at Harrison's Point, as well as the equipment and other things that were critical for us in the early stages of COVID, that we have been able to secure decent and good funding in order to allow us to pay for it over the next 20 years, rather than having to absorb it all in this fiscal year. And why do I say decent and good funding? Because there is a 4-year moratorium on the loan, and then the rate of interest is 1.25%, which is extraordinarily concessional. And the loan is over 20 years with that 4-year moratorium, as I said. And I want to thank publicly the former ambassador to the European Union, who has left us, Daniela Tremakere. I'll provide the spelling for the Clerk of Parliament. I'm not sure that my pronunciation was as good as it should be. But the bottom line is that she really, really, really went out of her way to meet with me and to trigger our interest in being able to spread out that funding over a period of time. This government will speak frankly all the time, and when we have to say what we have to say, it does not preclude us from thanking those who we have to thank. And I say that in the context of other comments that I would have made recently with respect to the EU. But we thank them for this concessional funding, because it takes the pressure off of us with respect to paying for that building, which, by the way, as a matter for history, has now seen its 3rd repurposing in the last 30 years under us. The first one coming, I see the leader of the opposition smiling, because he, like me, knows about the second one. But the first one was the Barbados Youth Service, which was done just literally about just over 20 years ago. And then the second one would have been for the temporary location for the prison when Glenderry Prison burned. And now, of course, when we went there at the end of February, in fact, we went there, the Attorney General and myself went there immediately after the naming of the road in Spikestown, the bypass road in Spikestown, after your predecessor, sir, to Kenmore Husbands. And when we went there the Friday night, Friday evening, about 6 p.m., by the next day, within 24 hours, the officials from MTW and others literally moved bush that was in some instances 12 to 15 feet high across acres and acres and acres of this land. And little did most people realize that within less than a month, we would have had a hospital functioning with equipment on that site, expanding for the first time in decades this country's ICU capacity, primary ICU capacity, to more beds than we have at the QEH. In the first instance, 38 in the primary ICU care facility with negative pressure to protect the medical officials, and then a secondary one without the negative pressure in the event that we really had to face serious, serious numbers, with another 40 beds in that secondary ICU care facility, bringing a total of 78 beds at Harrison's Point alone as we speak today in this Honorable Parliament. So we are grateful. We understand that the loan will be signed probably early in the new year, but the word literally came this morning that the loan had been approved, and I wanted to salute the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Economic Affairs and Ministry of Public Works, and indeed the project manager, Mr. Joe Steinbach, who did stellar work in ensuring that the project was delivered and in an efficient way within the time frames that were required. I also want to thank, of course, all those who donated significantly to the effort. Barbados has been lucky in that we don't only have people born here who feel this country is their own, but others who have come to live here and who have embraced this country as if they were born here. And the significant amount of charitable donations, indeed, the last amount I was aware of, $1.2 million last Friday, was pledged to our overall vaccine effort from the COVID-19 charity that was established in March or April of this year. And we are grateful to that donation because it will provide a significant amount of vaccines for thousands of Barbadians when it becomes available. On the issue of vaccines, sir, let me say for the record, this country will do it in its right time. And I want to say that there are those who doubted our pathway in the management of this COVID and who put tremendous pressure on the government, both internally and externally, to do differently and to do otherwise. We have a way of doing things. We consult, we follow the science, we listen to persons, we go back to see who is falling through the cracks, not intentionally, but very often these things happen in almost every area of activity in life. And we go back, therefore, and look and see if there's anyone who we need to pause and pick up before we continue the journey. And we do that recognizing that we will not always have the luxury to be pioneers, particularly when the pioneering efforts may cause persons to be compromised one way or the other. Because what we have in Barbados is a small nation state, not a village. And a small nation state does not allow us to inappropriately or injudiciously or arbitrarily take actions that can compromise the entire population. And it is for that reason that we act on a very, very solid ground when we say that we await the outcome of the assessments by the global experts at the World Health Organization and at the Pan American Health Organization. Small states like our own do not have the kind of medical research facilities or medical regulatory facilities to be able to do this work on their own. That is why we participate in these global and hemispheric bodies. And that is why those bodies have a higher percentage of experts than almost any other institution, hemispherically or globally, because they pool together the resources necessary to deal with all of the countries in the hemisphere, and then indeed, in the case of the WHO, all of the countries of the world. The reality is that, and it's not just for this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, I actually am co-chairing with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh a One Health Global Initiative on what the Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization has described when we launched it on the 22nd of November as the slow motion pandemic. And those who are hearing me would do well to listen, because it is likely to be one of the major problems facing the world. And indeed, there are persons well known to many of us in this chamber who have already fallen victim, because the antimicrobial resistance, which is the topic that we are dealing with, is really a recognition that whether it is through the manner in which we have been tending to animals and livestock, through oversupply of antibiotics to help treat them and to help grow them as well, or whether it is with respect to what we are doing with our plant life for our plant food, or whether it is with respect to what we do as human beings in having human beings take antibiotics for almost everything, such that the body has developed an immunity Now, all of us learned in primary school, high primary school, and low secondary school about the wonders of penicillin and what a difference that made to the lives of persons across the world. And all of the other cillins and illins that I can't really, that the member for St. Philip North would do better quoting than me. But what I call the cillins and the illins. And I learned it the hard way a couple of years ago, probably about 12 years ago, when I went for an extraction. And they did not give me an antibiotic. And of course, my face remained swollen for about 2 weeks and had all kinds of issues. What is significant is that that antimicrobial resistance can in fact lead to serious complications and death, because the superviruses that are being discovered, especially in hospitals, hospital-acquired infections, are literally resistant to many of the existing antibiotics that we have. And therefore, if the world does not get this right, it threatens to reverse a century of medical progress for the most basic medical and dental procedures, but equally, it is projected to be responsible for more deaths globally by the year 2050. Now, I want to put this in context. Ask yourself where you were in 1991. Because that will cause you to understand how soon 2050 is in the context of our life. Because if we can remember with ease the last 29 years, then we will project with disease the next 29 years. And I don't mean to pun on disease. But that is our reality in this world in which we live today. So, Mr. Speaker, coming back to the bill, we also felt that there were some people who, as is natural, whose responsibility it was not to sleep and not to drop the ball. And from the middle of January, most people globally and in this country only started to take this thing on at the end of February and March. But mercifully, the health officials in Barbados, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Attorney General, and the Minister of Education, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, and the Minister of Information, all were engaged from as early as the Ministry of Health from the middle of January, and those other persons by the last Friday in January, which I think was the 31st of January, and even on the 1st of February, I don't want to mislead on the dates, so let us look and see. I give you the exact date. The 1st of February, there was a meeting at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I believe it was, with those ministers and officials to which I just referred. The EOC had been established, the Health Emergency Operations Committee had already been established and functioning for 2 weeks, when others were still not even talking about this pandemic. And we were fortunate enough that Barbados has in its midst a well-qualified infection specialist doctor in the form of Dr. Corey Ford. We were also fortunate that the Dos Santos lab, with the help of the American government, had been completed, and indeed Dr. Sanjay Beckles, who is an extraordinarily dedicated scientist, was also there to be able to lead this effort. And for those who believe that her work is only within the lab, then you would not know that almost every day for this year, she and other doctors, Dr. Ingrid Kammerbach, and others, and Dr. Singh from the Port Health Department, were literally at the Barbados airport for any day. Flights have been coming in. And remember, flights were also leaving with respect to the 21,000 cruise ship passengers and crew that this country facilitated from the Bridgetown port to the Grantley Adams Airport in order to be able to go back home to their homes. Mr. Speaker, I say these things because, and we're fortunate that a number of persons, Dr. Singh and members of the Barbados Defense Force, have already in the Independence Honors received rewards for their gallantry, because I would not know how to even look at a ship and to climb on a rope ladder in protective equipment, to get up to the top of the ship, to go and take swabs, to get back down with the swabs and back down with the rope ladder on to a Coast Guard boat that bobbing up and down, bobbing up and down, bobbing up and down, and might or might not receive me when I step off the ladder into the boat. That's the reality. And if you can find 100 people in this country who could do that easily, then I say, well done. But I know it would be difficult so to do. So that the aspect of their gallantry, we isolated at independence deliberately because it was extraordinary courage for them to be able to do so. And I say so conscious that in those early days too, when people did not know what this thing was, these people were taking their lives in their own hands. And therefore, this Parliament has a duty in passing this legislation today to recognize that the legislation is literally there for us to be able to bring honor and to say to others, well done, thou good and faithful servants. And to ensure that those who watched on know that this is a country that does not take people for granted or extraordinary actions for granted, but salutes those who are prepared to defend it. And of course, Mr. Speaker, where would we be without the Tsar? There were things that needed to be said, and needed to be said in a manner that did not in any way mince words. And what was amazing is that Mr. Carter was singularly and blindly focused on the mission at hand. How do you change people's behavior? How do you protect people from one another and get them to refrain from things that feel so natural? For us, it is natural to hug. For us, it is natural to be up underneath one another. For us, it is natural to line. For us, it is natural to sit down together and eat. For us, it is natural to go in church and sing lustily. For us, it is natural to do all of these things. And all of a sudden, everything that is natural, to tell you now, is unnatural. Oh, Mr. Speaker, there are certain things. I realize that when I walk so, slightly with my toes apart. I've been trying to be able to walk with them straight. You ever realize how difficult it is? After decades of doing something one way, just to change the slightest thing is so difficult to do. And I give that example only to show you that when you now ask human beings to change how everything they do, and I'm satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that, and I've said this to the Minister of Health, that the issue of mental wellness has to be on the front burner, because I know that there are a number of people who are suffering elements of post-traumatic stress disorder by being cut off from people they love, from things they were accustomed doing, from all kinds of things that gave them that sense of purpose and sense of being and sense of wellness. And this is something that is likely to have a long shadow, and hence the Ministry of Health and all of our officials must be ready to treat to it. Regrettably, we saw what it did with one of the persons committing suicide on the cruise ship. So we know. And when I had to say to the persons over 70 to stay at home in the late February, recognizing that even my own parents, I don't think my father's left the house often for the last 6 or 7 months or whatever it is. And most people I know, over 75 in particular, who may have some kind of comorbidity, they've taken it seriously. But I want to reach out also and say bravo and thank you to to their family members and to the people who live next door to them, or to the people who may be helping them as a gardener, or to the people who may be coming to the house, or to the people who they just, you know how they got some old people that just take to young people and like them, and the young people take to the old people and like them too. For those kinds of people who continue then to be their bridge to ordinary daily life, whether at the shop or the supermarket, or getting a pension check change, or doing all of the things that would otherwise expose our seniors who helped build this nation to extraordinary risk. So, Mr. Speaker, I feel strongly that, therefore, that the Gold Medal of Achievement, which was passed when we passed the National Heroes Act as well, and I know because I was the minister who was responsible for pulling together these things on behalf of the government at the time, that had a limitation that would have allowed you to issue one Gold Medal of Achievement for persons rendering extraordinary service in the preceding year. Mr. Speaker, we do two things with this bill. One, it allows us to offer more than one medal, Gold Medal of Achievement, because it took more than one person at the level of leadership in order to bring us to where we are today in December 2020, where only 7 deaths, and 1 death is 1 death too many, but where we were able to limit the number of persons passing in this nation to 7, and where, most importantly, we have been, and I knock wood, the Minister of Health knows it each time when I say it, because only those who have to take reports each and every day know that you do not literally pray in vain or speak in a way that is inappropriate and boastful, because there's nothing boastful about saving lives. It is about compassion. It is about doing the right thing. It is about being able, the fact that the United States of America has now lost 300,000 people. Yesterday, you heard when I spoke when it had reached 250,000. It is now beyond our population. It is incomprehensible. It is incapable of reasoning and rational thought. That 300,000 people, especially in circumstances where the question will be asked, was all done to minimize the exposure and the incidence of hospitalization and deaths, or could more have been done? And among those 300,000 people, regrettably, are many of our sons and daughters. In fact, more than we have lost on this land, we have seen more Barbadians lose their lives in North America and in the United Kingdom than have lost their lives in this country. Mr. Speaker, these are not words that fall easily from my mouth. And it is a matter of grave, grave, grave regret that the world did not follow the kind of solid, coherent policy framework that was needed to fight back this pandemic. And that at the time when the world needed global leadership the most, regrettably, it has been found wanting. I don't get tied up, therefore, because this is not about boasting or anything so. This is about recognizing that with each day, the battle is real. And with each day, you start the day as you did the day before, conscious that you have to take the steps each and every day. It only takes one loose moment. It only takes one weakening of your resolve for you and your family to be exposed. And we see it here in the region with recent difficulties in Grenada and in other parts of the region where we saw spikes emerge where there had been relatively good management of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, if we want to make real the words of the Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown, the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, that there shall be no retreat and that there shall be no surrender, then it requires us being vigilant each and every day until the vaccines that have been taken can bring about the herd immunity necessary to be able to protect us as human beings. It is no wonder that the Spanish flu took 2 years before they could tame it. And we expect, as I said, that when the time comes, vaccines will be delivered as long as we can access them and as long as we are satisfied from WHO and PAHO that they are safe and ready. There's nothing to be gained by being the first. There's something to be gained by being the most informed and the most ready in terms of rollout when it comes. And that is all that I have asked the Ministry of Health to do for us. We follow the science, we consult, and we educate and sensitize. And those things are critical to the protection of this nation. Mr. Speaker, I should say to you that amongst our frontline workers, however, are not only those who I have called before, but there are also our tourism workers and our port workers. As I said, the immigration officers, the customs officers, the port health workers, the customs guards, all of the people that keep the Bridgetown port and the Grantley Adams Airport functioning. Okay, the air traffic controllers, all of them had to come out and risk being affected in the height of the April, May, June thing. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the people who man the quarantine hotels. Let's get real. The cleaners, people who cooking for people, the people who garden them. All of these people became a critical component. And therefore, when this government says that we want to honor people in the public and private sector, we do so conscious that it is important to say thank you, and it is important to remind everybody in this nation that when we work together with a single mission, what we are capable of achieving and how we can do it. There is no doubt that Barbados has gained the admiration of many, not just regionally, but internationally. And indeed, the welcome stamp, the 12-month welcome stamp, would have meant nothing if the brand that we have for safety was not a credible brand. So what do I mean by that? You could advertise as much as you want about a 12-month welcome stamp for people to come and stay with you. But if they come in to stay and not be safe, where they come in? They come in. So that the notion of just having the product was not sufficient for it to be successful. What makes it successful is the underlying brand. That any assertion we make with a brand has to be credible in order for it to be sustained or for it to be real. And you know exactly what I mean. If you go and they tell you drink this drink, and every time you drink it, it tastes bad, they can't tell you again as the best tasting thing or as the real thing. It tastes bad, it tastes bad. Now, Coke can get away with what it does because it tastes good. And hence, it has a wonderful brand. It is the real thing. You understand? Nike can get away with a brand that has endured for decades. Just do it. You understand? Because shoes are involved with motion. And more often than not, it is that motion and that comfortable and propelling motion that allows them, along with the style, to sell and be as successful as they are. Similarly, Barbados's brand has to relate to safety. And the 12-month welcome stamp was simply saying, if you want to come here, we are focusing on persons in particular who may want to spend longer than 3 or 4 days because you have to spend the first 2 or 3 days in a facility with restricted movement. Some people like to use the Q word. Some people like to use the RM word. Quarantine, restricted movement, whatever it is. The bottom line is you're not mixing with patrons until you spend some time alone. Secondly, that when, and the Minister of Health can speak at length to this, and I hope he shall, that when we said we were doing a second test, the only thing I didn't do was lose my head. I had people coming at me from larboard to starboard, Mr. Speaker. Barbados can't do the second test. Barbados this, Barbados that, Barbados this. Everywhere else in the region opening up fully and this. We never closed down. But what we've said all along is safe work for safe people in a safe country. Safe work for safe people in a safe country. You follow that motto, you break it down, you see where the science takes you, you understand the limits. We know already that we can get licked up economically. We knew that on the 20th of March this year when I stood right here and spoke to us when we finished the second reading speech of the appropriation bill. We knew it. And that is why we went to the International Monetary Fund and we said, look, the targets which we have this year may not make it. Let us do the adjustments from now so that we are on the same page. And we did those adjustments, initially moving from a fiscal target of a primary surplus of 6% down to 1%, then to 0, and then to -1 because of the protracted nature of the pandemic without the opportunity for a vaccine to be available. Mr. Speaker, that welcome stamp, therefore, was designed to allow people to come for long stays, because if you don't mind losing the first 2-3 days, then we are going to treat to you in the same way we treat to all Bajans. Try to protect you as far as possible and try to ensure that one, persons coming in who do test positive, that we are able to isolate, and that this country has had, I think we've done over 50,000 tests in the last 10 months. And I'll ask the Minister of Health to get me the correct number of tests that we've done to date, please, while I speak, as well as the number of persons. And for sure, the majority of persons testing since July to now, more than 98% of the persons testing positive between July and now have all tested positive on the second test. Mr. Speaker, on the second test. And therefore, can you imagine if I had listened and the government had listened to those persons who said no second test, what Barbados would be like now, recognizing that our risks are even greater because in a country that is as dense as we are in certain parts of the island, we would have serious difficulties, particularly in the urban corridor. Mr. Speaker, I speak conscious that this is not over, but that we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel with the availability of the vaccines, thank you, and with the COVAX facility, which is intended to be able to procure for countries of the world, particularly the ones that are not able to command and order and get 4 times and 5 times what they need, as some of the G20 countries have done. I'm not sure where that carries them, because we all acknowledge that the world is not safe until all countries receive the vaccine, and that as long as there are countries that can retain the virus without the vaccine and herd immunity curtailing its spread, then all of us remain vulnerable globally with respect to that. So that, Mr. Speaker, I hope that the country recognizes that as we go forward, we will keep them engaged on the things that we do. I spoke about that second test. I said Independence morning, as I addressed the country as well, that in addition to the second test, is, in my view, the manner in which both Dr. Beckers and their teams and Dr. Ford and his teams, how they work with each other to be able to determine on the spectrum with the testing whether a person is emerging from the pandemic, from the disease, or whether a person is now going into it. And by having that third and fourth test, if necessary, to establish trajectory, we are in a position to better protect those who are both treating them as well as those who have to look after them once they come out of any facility. Mr. Speaker, it is against that background that I am proud, therefore, to be able to say that it is the right thing to do. I want to address one other matter before I sit, and it is what goes along with the medal or the badge. In a perfect world, we would like to say everything, but we don't live in a perfect world. And we already know that the biggest hit that the country is taking is not on the public health front, but in fact on the economic front. And I say so, conscious, Mr. Speaker, that we can recover from debt. We've already recovered from debt. We can recover from restricted economic activity. But what we can't recover from is death. One is DEBT and one is DEATH. They both dastardly start with DE. I don't know what else starts with that. But they both dastardly start with that. And the bottom line is, sir, that we have to recognize that if we can keep people alive, then we can fight. We can live to fight another day. But if we can't keep people alive, it becomes a moot point. Mr. Speaker, and that is why this government has invested as heavily in an approach that is fundamentally about testing and tracing. Can you imagine if the Ministry of Health did not trace when there was the risk of the NAB cluster, or when there was the risk of the other cluster in September that went to Ellerslie School? It is the aggressive contact tracing and testing, which is a sign of a stellar public health system, which has been traditionally, that has been the legacy of Barbados. Barbados has produced more public health experts in the 20th century in the Caribbean than per capita than any other Caribbean country. And that is why the science of public health, the exemplars of public health are Belgian in the region. Sir Kenneth Standard, Sir Ken Stewart, Maurice Meyer. We can go on and on, all of the persons who really made a significant difference in the quality of public health. And if you ask doctors who know about public health, they will tell you that the ability for this little rock of 166 square miles to get on top of public health issues is one of the things that has been responsible for our development over the decades. Because can you imagine if an outbreak would otherwise wipe out large swaths of the population, what would happen to this country's development and what would happen to the opportunities and indeed potential prosperity of the nation and families? So, Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious that this is critical. Sir, to bring it all back together, therefore, we would love to be able to say that we can give everybody something and everything. And we would love to be able to do it on an ongoing basis. But we can't afford it. But what we will do, we will sit down with the unions and discuss it, as has already started in some instances, is to look at a one-off ex gratia payment for those who had to work on the front line, either intensely or on the second layer with respect to the level of risk exposed. And we expect that if we can have sensible discussions, that we can do something that is an ex gratia payment that the country can afford in addition to the medals. We know that when people were doing what they were doing in April, May, and June, and March, that they were not looking for reward, that they were not looking for honor or award. And it is for that reason that I feel that as a nation, that in addition to the medals, that we find some tangible little way, ex gratia payment, one-off payment, to say thank you in a way that matters. Mr. Speaker, and I say so conscious that like with everything else, we will never please everyone, but we will do right by what we believe. And that is why I said what I said earlier about the national minimum wage, that it is incomprehensible to me that somebody would want to dispute that somebody should get more than $6.25 an hour. It's incomprehensible to me. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that this Honorable House will pass these two bills. I want publicly, because it is a matter of public record, that a week after I had spoken in that same debate to lay out the economic package, that I didn't even know that I would have to on that occasion, didn't know it until days before, that I would have to go for emergency surgery at the height of the pandemic. It was a difficult decision for me, and I promised the country when I went that I would talk to them within a week. And in that first or second broadcast after the surgery, I made the point then that we would come back to say thank you to the frontline workers. And I just want you to know that I've not forgotten you. That this government has not forgotten you. That my ministers and MPs in here, that we all agree that this action is the least that we can do. But I also feel a personal responsibility to say thank you to those ministers who I called out earlier, but in particular for the member for St. Michael Southeast who acted on my behalf in those difficult days of uncertainty. And of us not knowing where the country was going, and I understood that I could not have chosen to go for an operation at a worse time. If ever I knew the meaning of Charles Dickens' phrase, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, trust me, it was that. But I also knew another saying that saved us and that we were taught as little children, that a stitch in time saves nine. And believe you me, with that, I could change it to a stitch in time saves lives, not nine. So that I really want from this floor and in the spirit of Christmas that is before us to say thank you to my colleagues. They will tell you that sometimes they're very rough, but I've also learned that you have to be gracious. And I really, really, really do want to say that I am proud to lead the team that I lead and to have persons who are prepared always to step up to the plate and to put country first and country before their individual circumstances. And that it has not escaped me that as I stand here to thank those who worked on the front line of the actual health aspect of this virus, or keeping bodies together through supermarket and other facilities as we went through this difficult moment. I in particular want to thank, as I said, the Honorable Member of St. Michael Southeast, but the Honorable Attorney General who has left his seat. I wouldn't normally say so, but I'm calling him out because I hope he's hearing what I'm saying, also was placed under the most extraordinary pressure that an Attorney General has been placed under since independence in this country. And it is my judgment that he has been equal to the task and that he has literally served this country with distinction, especially in this year, 2020. And I've said the same about the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the early part of this thing. Believe you me, we were living in the wild west, Mr. Speaker. I've never known what it is to be at the center of so much to and fro and trying to find out whether countries were going to impose export restrictions and legislative aids to block movement of goods and equipment, and in some instances, other things that were critical medicines. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but in addition, because he is an eminent surgeon, was able to add significant value to the stability of the decision-making of this government. And I add to that as well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the other members who would have supported, I'm coming to the Minister of Health separately, who would have supported the minister. In some instances, it was the ministers in finance and economic affairs. In other instances, it was the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology. In other instances, it was member for St. George South, who was Minister of Commerce and Small Business and Entrepreneurship. In other instances, the member for St. Thomas, because who was the most vulnerable population? It was, in fact, the elderly. And in spite of her being one, I don't want to say so because she doesn't look it, in spite of her having some vulnerabilities, she never once said to me, not me, I may be among the class that you are trying to protect. Not once did she say so. And Mr. Speaker, I am conscious and grateful for those small mercies and for those actions by the cabinet. The member for St. Peter, he was stretched out with the social partnership because, as I said, we consulted, we took decisions as a country, we tried as far as possible to ensure, and I know it was done even for the few weeks that I was not fully involved with that. The head of the private sector, I want to salute and thank Mr. Ed Clark, and indeed to salute the members of the private sector, the members of the labor movement who equally recognized that it was not business as usual and that their workers were being asked to respond in a way and to do things that were necessary to save a nation, but it was not business as usual. And then, of course, came the general. You know, I'm sure that you're not permitted to go back and to give promotions in the defense force or in the military when a man has retired for over 15 years. But if it was possible, I would like to tell you that the member for the city of Bridgetown should be a brigadier general. But if the military is not prepared to give him that, then I know the rest of his colleagues are willing to give it to him. And we therefore take those words and use them liberally in the same way that he used his own military metaphors liberally. And when he said to the nation, there shall be no retreat, there shall be no surrender, it was almost a Churchillian moment for many. And to that extent, I want to say that we're not only grateful for that kind of advocacy and moral leadership, but we have come to understand now that be the news good or bad, the member for the city of Bridgetown never shirked from his responsibility for talking truthfully and honestly with the Barbadian people. And that, in my view, is going to be one of the things that will be regarded as one of the reasons why Barbados has been able to generally contain this virus. And he set out the objectives, you know. The first thing is, if you can't stop it, you've got to minimize it and contain it. And whether it was in his press conferences, or whether it was his meetings, or whether it was on the platform, because I think he was involved somewhere along the line in something called a by-election, his message was the same. And more than anything else, and I end on this point, that he and the members of the EOC, whose names I will ask him to read into the records of this honorable chamber today. Why? Because come sun or come rain, come bank holiday or come work day, that team has met effectively almost every day since the middle of January of this year. Not quite every, but almost, I would say 98% of the days. And they have executed their task with diligence. We don't always necessarily have an easy road. There are times when we have to disentangle and deconstruct and reconstruct and try to work out what are the principles and the public policy we're trying to support. There is no There is no manual. There is no playbook in the sense that not even the playbook that George Bush and Obama left could help them in this day without tweaking. Because we were in uncharted waters. And a country with limited resources in the middle of an IMF program with an island, tourism and travel dependent. And that's why the tourism workers have to be on the front line with the health workers too, because one protects our lives and the other protects our livelihoods. Simple. And for our lives to be meaningful, we need livelihoods. So that you can't separate out the two. But the member for the city of Bridgetown, in my view, merits the acclaim of his peers for an extraordinary year. An extraordinary year of service. Mr. Speaker, I am not the first one receiving the calls, but I am probably among the first few. And every morning, the first thing I do is pick up this phone and look and see the state of play. And every afternoon, I pick up the phone again and look and see the state of play. And I tell you, it requires extraordinary mettle and courage to keep your head above water, to keep hope alive, and to continue to contain what will be regarded as the greatest threat to global stability for a century in the form of this pandemic. We are not out of the woods, but it is the judgment of this government that rather than wait for Heroes Day on the 28th of April, because you are all our heroes, but rather than wait for Heroes Day, that it is now that you need the extra wind in your sail to keep going. That coming out of Christmas, Christmas is a reflective time. Christmas is a time when people think about families, when people consider what they've gained, what they've lost. New Year's is a time of resolutions. We believe that in the month of January, we want to salute you for a job well done in protecting your country in the year 2020. And in our small and modest way, in our Barbadian way, this is how we do it. And this is who we are. And we say to you that more than anything else, you're rising to the challenge. You're treating to the task. And you're containing the virus in the manner in which we have done makes this country among those few in the world who are being admired for being a safe place to do safe work in a safe way. On behalf of a grateful nation, we pass, Mr. Speaker, that this legislation be passed so that we may now complete the task of pinning on the chest those who have come to help us. And by say those, I don't only mean those Barbadians who are here, but I also give thanks to the Cuban Brigade of Nurses and doctor who is here with us and have been here with us for more than 9 months, or 8 months, sorry, as we fight this thing. The date for the actual ceremony will be announced only because we are trying to fine-tune some things, but the government and the Ministry of Health and my office will announce the date for the ceremony, but it will be in early January. And as I said, we will continue the discussions with the unions as to what is an appropriate one-off ex gratia payment that we can look to make in January too, for persons who were on the front line in protecting this nation that we love. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you and ask that both of these bills be read. I ask that the Barbados Humanitarian, just looking for the exact name of the bill, the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award bill be read a second time. Thank you, sir.
Honourable member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lend my voice to this debate, and I do so with a sense of joy and a sense of pride. And that sense of joy is not only associated with the season that we are in, a season that I really do like very much, but a sense of joy because of what I've been able not only to experience, but to observe over the last several months. And a sense of pride that I am part of a government that would move so swiftly to be able to honor some extraordinary people in this country, or some ordinary people too who did some extraordinary things. And I say so because if you are able to view it from my lens, I think you will get a very good perspective of really what is going on here. And I say that because in my other life, serving this country for close to 27 years, I would have been trained locally, regionally, and internationally for what I'm doing right now. I would have been exposed. I would have been able to gather a lot of experience having served in humanitarian missions here in Barbados, even though they were localized and not at a national scale. But regionally, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Antigua, in Grenada, and even assisting in the planning for the response effort for Montserrat after the eruption of the volcano. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that with that experience and that exposure, that training, I don't even count myself in what I'm saying in the sense that I was able to observe a number of persons who would have been trained in their own fields of technical specialties, but not for a crisis of this magnitude. A crisis, in my opinion, I don't think that we have seen. This has to be the largest national humanitarian crisis in a post-Jeanette Barbados, and even even longer than that. We have generations of Barbadians who would never have been exposed to what we are exposed to now. And to see the response coming from so many sectors of this society, really, that is what gives me the joy in terms of what we are doing in recognizing that response. Barbadians traditionally have always shown the humanitarian side of this nation in helping others, whether it was through telethons, radiothons. We've contributed to every single effort where countries in this region and even beyond have been impacted. But to endure what we've been enduring here in this country for the first time, I think that is where the joy comes from in terms of the response and the fact that we are recognizing that response. From the very beginning, and I mean, we are already blessed in a lot of ways, because in the middle of the pandemic, and at the worst time possible, the Prime Minister was talking about a stitch in time, but we had a person who was leading this effort in terms of the testing and coordinating all of that. And that doctor was then sent on an attachment to PAHO to become the regional officer responsible for the regional immunization program. And we had someone who was able to come and take up the mantle, and within a couple of days, that doctor then started to lead the charge and is still doing so. And I think that speaks volume as to exactly the depth that we have in the country and in the public health sector. We had situations where, for example, our number one technical official, chief medical officer, was unavailable due to certain personal issues that he was dealing with, but he came out, and I mean, he came out fighting. Even when the chips were down for him, he was still at the forefront of the battle. And these are the things that is why I'm feeling the way I am feeling today, to be honest with you. We had situations where those persons working in the lab, and they were all females. Day in and day out, sometimes when they were ready at the end of a long day to go home to look after their children or be with their families, and then another load of samples arrive at the last minute, and they remain behind for an additional 3-4 hours to make sure that they did what they had to do. And these things really mean a lot to me as the Minister of Health and Wellness. And we've had the 4 persons who were honored during the Independence Award ceremony. And I can tell you that too was a sense of joy. And why? Prime Minister speaks about climbing the ropes in order to get on board the ships. But that happened at a time when other people did not even want to touch the ropes. And that is the value of the effort displayed by those persons, and it really touched my heart. I've attended several award ceremonies as former aide-de-camp to a Governor General, as a member of the military, but that one for me was special. Special because of what they did and my understanding and appreciation for the effort, and also the fact that that award, to the best of my knowledge, although it is within the national awards, I don't think it was awarded before. And for the government of Barbados to recognize those persons at this time, I think that was a very, very noble and special undertaking, Madam Prime Minister. So we are here today, and we recognize that the effort of those persons really should be rewarded. But I know also that it was not only within the ministry that I have the privilege of leading, because I remember the night when the same ladies who were operating at the lab, in order to get something to eat, where did they have to go? To the gas station. Because if you don't have the gas in order to continue, and I'm not speaking in a figurative sense, then they would not have been able to do what they did. And all of the other persons who gave and rendered support. We had people who volunteered in the beginning, some doctors, for example. The medical officer of health responsible for the polyclinic at St. Philip, 6 Rose, he has not seen that polyclinic for the year because he is the person who has spearheaded the swabbing in this country, and he was working 7 days a week from day one, and he volunteered. And we had a lot of persons like that who said to us, send me, I am ready, I will go, I will do it. And at a time of great uncertainty as existed then, it really makes it very special today for us to be doing this. And we salute all of those persons. We had persons working with us who are members of the Seventh-day Adventist faith. But at the time of the crisis, when they were required to work, even on that day, they did. These are things that you really have to appreciate. Really have to appreciate. The Emergency Operations Center worked really hard. And there are a number of persons on that, from the Chief Medical Officer, the doctors, Senior Medical Officers of Health, Drs. Bess and Drs. Phillips, Roddock. We had Dr. Broom, Dr. Beckles, Senior Environmental Health Officer and the Deputy, also the Senior Public Health Nurse. And we had some additional persons that helped us on the EOC that were not from health, like the Chief Immigration Officer, like the Joint Regional Communications Center representative. We even had tourism officials, Royal Barbados Police Force, BAMP, the head of the National Mental Health Commission, Archdeacon Lynch, and others. And people like Dr. Singh and all of those were part of this process, part of the EOC. And these are the people who really have been helping us to manage the pandemic. But, you know, there's another side of this for me too, because having served on humanitarian missions abroad, and I know the Prime Minister alluded to this in terms of what we are presenting now, I am happy to see the award being created, because this award can be used, as the Prime Minister said, the Honorable Prime Minister, for other occasions. And in the past, if you had a humanitarian mission in Haiti, there was an award, a local, as well. If you had a humanitarian mission in Dominica, there was an award. Now we can have one humanitarian award, and on this award can then have different clasps indicating the year or the circumstance. And I think this really makes a lot of sense. And this is a really, really prudent decision that we are taking here this morning by debating and finally approving this bill. So, of all the things that we would have done, and we continue to do, and we have to continue to keep our guards up, because it is not over. It is not over by any stretch of the imagination. And even with the vaccines, and I want to really make this point and make it very strongly, the vaccines will enhance what we've been doing for the last several months. But if we continue to do exactly what we are doing, we will get out of this. The vaccine will just make it faster, safer, and better so that economic activity can resume and our way of life can resume in this country. And that is an important and fundamental point, because the Barbadians, and I attended a couple events in schools recently, and the school children and parents and so forth, there are a lot of people who would like for the children to be able to come back to school, in the physical sense, to be able to get on with that. And that is recognizing, of course, that school is more than just the academic side. It's the socialization and the interactions and so forth. So these are all the things that I think having the vaccines will allow us to get to that point quicker. But it is still up to each and every one of us to continue to observe the protocols and to do what we've been doing all along, because we not only are our brothers and sisters' keepers, but we are responsible for our individual actions and for our individual health and safety. And I urge Barbadians, even during this festive season, not to forget that. Enjoy, but remember we are still in a pandemic. Now, I also want to take this time to thank all of those organizations that would have been working with us throughout this year. And we have had some really good advice and technical support from the Pan American Health Organization. They have been with us all the way. And the last donation that I would have received from the Pan American Health Organization, for example, would have been a number of oxygenators, I think they're called, but very, very critical in this fight and very helpful for Harrison Point and elsewhere. And also a nice vehicle that would give us some capacity or greater capacity to be able to get out our mobile testing teams and swabbing teams into areas that we want them to go. And these are the kind of things that we've been getting, the kind of technical assistance as well, which has been forthcoming. And then there are other nations that have contributed to the effort, to the humanitarian assistance of Barbados. And we thank those nations. Canada, for one, India has offered, the People's Republic of China, the United States of America. Those are the major ones that have made contributions in terms of the Ministry of Health and what it is that we have been called upon to do. But yes, SEDEMA has been there with us in terms of providing the logistics support at the regional level, because SEDEMA has that responsibility in humanitarian assistance, and they are the regional experts, and they have done a very, very good job in transporting and distributing things from as far as the United Arab Emirates. And we want to thank SEDEMA for the effort that they have been providing. The University of the West Indies as well, which is the final one that I will deal with, they've been assisting the ministry all along throughout this process in modeling and mapping out things. And they're even giving us some assistance now in terms of getting ourselves ready for the receipt of vaccines and the distribution of vaccines when those vaccines are made available to us. But it is really to the people of Barbados. And the Prime Minister has indicated that we would love to be able to give to everyone. But I am telling you that there are a lot of people out there. I've met humanitarians from all walks of life. There are people who have come to me and said, look, we don't need the assistance, but the old lady down the gap or the person in the alley there, they need the assistance more than I do or than we do. There are people, ordinary people and friends of all of us who would have come up to us and said, look, I know your things are tight. You all are trying to help people with vouchers and so forth. You're purchasing vouchers. Take that. That is my contribution. These are the little things that have been really important in this country. And then the entire country really have been part of where we are today because generally speaking, Barbadians have been disciplined, they have cooperated, they have collaborated, they have exercised good judgment. There's some, of course, who would not fit into that category or that description, but that is life. Everyone will not do exactly what they're required to do. But if we didn't have the collective response that we've been able to have so far, we would not be where we are at this point in time. And we also want to thank those. So the award, why the award is important in my view, is that it gives people a sense of pride. And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that those persons, when they started, they did not do what they're doing for their country because of any award or any honor, is that they were honored to be able to do what they have been doing for their country. And by getting this award, it means that each time you look at it, you feel a sense of pride as to the contribution that you would have made to your country. And then your children can see what their parents, what their uncles, their aunts, sisters, and brothers have achieved and have been able to contribute to their country. So it also gives people the chance to aspire for great things and to be able to operate at the national level and putting others above self, putting country above community. And these are the things that will stand out for me in terms of the year 2020. So we had an extraordinary year that required some extraordinary efforts, and those efforts are being rewarded. And it starts right here by all of us in this honorable chamber giving our stamp of approval to this bill that will then enable those persons who so richly deserve the awards to be able to do so in January. And so I say in conclusion that having participated in many humanitarian efforts and having been trained at some of the best institutions on the planet, I still have not faced personally what we are facing now, and I can imagine for the ordinary person who might not have been as blessed as I have been in terms of training and preparation to be able to do what they're doing and to continue to do it. Man, this is an effort that will never and should never be forgotten in this country. This effort, this year, really say who we are as Barbadians. And I like the phrase, Prime Minister coined my phrase of no retreat, no surrender, but this is who we are. Yes. This indeed is who we are. And this has been our finest moment. And so I give full support for this bill, and I urge every single one across the aisle, everyone in here to support this because it is worthy of support, and it is the least we could do to say thank you to all of those Barbadians from all walks of life and others who have contributed to the cause of humanitarian assistance at a time more than any other time when this country needed that support. And with those few remarks, I am obliged.
Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think a lot has been said already in relation to what all of us agree is a very appropriate piece of legislation, a bill that has come before, that is now before this honorable chamber. Much of what has been said speaks to something that is very dear to me in a personal capacity, but also as the minister responsible for workers in this country. I've had occasion to say to some of my constituents that one of the few people in St. Peter who would have been around during the period of the Spanish flu is a gentleman by the name of Mel Williams. He is 110 years old at this point and about 10 months. But I tell you, Mr. Speaker, he cannot remember anything about the Spanish flu. What this country and what this world has faced is something that nobody had any roadmap, any guidance, any notes on how to deal with it. And I first want, in supporting this bill, and because it is a cognate debate, supporting the Gold Award of Achievement bill as well, but particularly for the humanitarian bill, I want first to speak to the leadership that was exemplified in how this country, this 166 square miles, this 430 square kilometer island, was able to handle a pandemic of unprecedented proportions. And I think it speaks to the honorable member for the city just reflected the phrase the Prime Minister uses often, this is who we are. And I think Barbadians really ought to understand that within this country lies the capacity to handle almost anything that can be thrown at us. And so I want to say to Barbadians, even as we speak to recognizing those who are on the front line, that whatever lies in our future, we can handle. I think God has given us the capacity to do it, and we are able to face whatever is in our future. And so I would want also to agree with the mantra that whatever comes our way, we should not retreat. As the honorable member for the city would say, we should not surrender to whatever comes our way. You know, Mr. Speaker, we used to have, and I know this very well from my previous life in the tourism industry, there were always these issues, and it always happened when a storm or a hurricane was coming. There would be an announcement of a close down, and there would be a lot of debate about who were essential workers. So who were those persons who you had to specially look after as a storm approached? This pandemic, Mr. Speaker, has redefined for the world what is meant by an essential worker. Maybe for the first time, we recognize that in order to eat, somebody in a supermarket is going to have to facilitate the distribution of food to those who need food. For the first time, and this is one that we had to deal with, the Attorney General and the Honorable Member for St. Michael Southeast and myself dealt with the issuing of passes. And one of the early ones we had to deal with was a request from a company in Barbados that packages toilet paper. And as interesting as it may sound, we had to determine that those who package toilet paper in Barbados are essential, because I think many of us would remember what was happening across the world as it related to something that we thought as simple as toilet paper. So we allowed workers who package toilet paper to be able to leave home and take the risk, in some cases traveling on public transportation, to get to work so that they could provide for us. And so, Mr. Speaker, I really want to say that the pandemic has said to the world, but it is said to Barbados, and I hope it is said to all of us, that all work is honorable. All work is to be respected. This is not a situation where there are persons who are really important only because they earn large amounts of money. And I'm here not referring to attorneys practicing at the bar. I'm referring to those and the others who may earn significant sums. And to remind us that, there's really, in my view now, not low skill work, but low paid work. Because all work brings significant value to the existence of people, to the operation of an economy. All work is vital, and all workers are important. And as a country, we have to understand that. And so we started to talk about supermarket workers when the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast, acting as she was for the Honourable Prime Minister at the time, took me along to a couple of supermarkets. It was at that point, when we were looking at curtains being put up, that we were recognizing the danger that some of our workers were experiencing, actually on the front line. And it was for the first time that I, having grown up in a supermarket environment, had to think that the cashier who is attending to a customer has at his or her, but usually her, back, the customer who is dealing with the other cashier who is getting really, really close. And at that time, like the Honourable Prime Minister said, there was real uncertainty about the virus. The question I remember us having to face on the Cabinet Subcommittee was like, is this virus aerosol? Is it only droplets? And we had workers in this country who were going to work every day to make sure that we could live. Not sure if when the person at their back coughed, that there was aerosol that they could pick up the virus and take home to a family. They themselves infected and take home to their family. So our workers really have to be saluted. Transport workers, workers in the port, many of them mentioned before, the construction workers at Harrison's Point. We spoke about Mrs. Steinbach, the project manager, but those construction workers work day and night. 400 of them day and night to make sure that our capacity to provide beds, ICU beds, was increased. A small country. We did not have state lines that we could send people across to use their hospitals. We did not have hospital ships that we could anchor in the Deepwater Harbor to take and to facilitate the treatment of persons who may need treatment because we've run out of beds in our primary care facilities. These people dedicated themselves, those we consider ordinary workers, dedicated themselves to making sure that the capacity of this country to face whatever was before us was put in place. So, as I said, whether it was providing food or toilet paper, or constructing healthcare facilities, or collecting the garbage that we sometimes so indiscriminately toss out, these people were working and working hard to make sure that this lovely rock of ours was kept safe and that the people, the inhabitants of the country, were able to live at a decent level. Those workers, Mr. Speaker, must be congratulated. I want to mention quickly those in the third sector. Because, Mr. Speaker, those in the supermarkets and construction, they were working. But there were also there was a category of persons who on a daily sometimes and often on a weekly basis left their homes to make sure that many of the vulnerable in our communities had food. And so there were persons in many NGOs, there were persons in faith-based organizations who, during the pandemic, during the shutdown, were actually coming together, purchasing, receiving deliveries of foodstuffs and toiletries, packaging these items and distributing the items to those who were very vulnerable, especially the older members of our community. And I remember we were encouraging people not to go into the houses of the elderly. You know, sometimes you had to put the bags on the step and the person would come out to receive the packages. Many people in our third sector, in civil society organizations and faith-based organizations, took their time, in some cases put themselves at risk to make sure that people did not fall through the cracks. As a government, we recognize and we stated it publicly that our obligation was to our people to make sure that everybody was looked after. We may not have been able to provide everything that everybody wanted, but we had to make sure that everybody was at least able to eat. And I want to salute those workers, those members of civil society organizations and faith-based organizations who made up in their minds that they were going to be their brothers and their sisters' keepers. I started by speaking to the matter of leadership and governance. The Honorable Prime Minister is, in my view, you know, she is not one who blows her own trumpet. But I get the real sense that in the world, even at the time when she went on an international newscast to call for leadership, the sense I got from hearing the responses of people, not just in Barbados, is that many people felt that our Prime Minister was helping to provide some of the global leadership that was needed at that time. Standing shoulder to shoulder with the World Health Organization and its leadership that was under significant pressure by larger, more powerful organizations and countries, standing with the World Health Organization so that every time the leader of WHO spoke and he felt he had our leaders' support, you could tell that he felt emboldened to speak. And I say that to say, Mr. Speaker, that even a small country like ours can stand head and shoulders above everybody else, can come to the fore when those who we traditionally expect to lead retreat. We can help to provide the leadership at the global level that is needed in the face of these significant events, an event like a global pandemic that has taken the lives of so many thousands of persons. And in our governance during that period, one of the things that really stood out to me, sometimes leaders, when they make pronouncements and they realize that something has changed and we may need to change what we've said just a few days ago, there are some people who are so puffed up that they refuse to make a change. In this country, led by our Prime Minister, if we put in place protocols and we found out 2 or 3 days later that something needed to be changed, we changed it. Because we recognized that this was not a time to stand on a high horse and get on like you met yourself. We are leading people. People are depending on us. And so, for me, almost the epitome of good governance is when a country and its leaders are able to recognize when changes have to be made for the sake of the country and for the sake of its people, and the leaders are willing to make that change. That, Mr. Speaker, is good governance. That is the governance that the Barbados Labour Party, this government, brings to the table. This morning, I was part of a ILO session which dealt with something that we are not often involved with, and it has to do, the Honorable Member for St. Michael South would be familiar, the International Maritime Convention. And you know, across the world, those who work on ships were left to the whims and fancies, sometimes of nature. Ships were abandoned. Their crews were abandoned because nobody wanted to take these ships. Everybody felt, or many people felt, that everybody on a ship was a carrier of the virus and would infect the country. Ships, we heard, were docked off of countries. Sometimes people did not even want to provide the tendering to take food and other supplies to these ships. This government, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, spoke to this. This government, in spite of all of that, did the right thing and facilitated the transfer of persons. I think the Honourable Prime Minister spoke to 21,000. I don't remember the number, but thousands of persons, passengers and crew. This country facilitated the movement of those workers. Because, Mr. Speaker, those who work on ships have families too. They are workers, they have families, they're subject to the same fears of all other workers. This country recognized and continues to recognize that workers, the feeling of workers, the plight of workers has to be taken into consideration. And we have to do whatever we can do to make sure that workers are taken care of. And so even though the vast majority of those workers were not Barbadians, we recognize ourselves as a part of the family of nations. And whatever this country can do to assist workers, wherever those workers are from, this government is prepared to do. And we have demonstrated in the pandemic situation during the lockdown that we are ready to assist workers whenever workers need to be assisted. I am not able to sit without speaking a little bit about minimum wage. The Prime Minister said that she is, and I think all right-thinking people should be, amazed that 3 or 4 months after talking about how valuable particular categories of workers are, that there are still people who are content to allow certain categories of workers to be in a situation where they are barely able to survive. Currently in Barbados, there is a minimum wage set for only 2 categories of workers: shop assistants and domestic workers. And the rate for shop assistants, the rate is both $6.25 per hour. $6.25 per hour. Now that is before deducting national insurance. $6.25 per hour. That will give, what, $250 if you work 40 hours a week before deducting national insurance. There are households, Mr. Speaker, that are expected to live on that amount of money every week. $6.25 in 2012. The economists advise that over the passage of time, that $6.25 is now worth $3.21. Well, at least in 2019. the research we have. $3.21. That, Mr. Speaker, represents a decrease in purchasing power of over 48%. Let me put that another way. What a supermarket attendant could buy with their wages in 2012, they can now buy half in 2020. Half of what they could have bought in 2012 with the income that they are earning, were earning, and are earning. That is, Mr. Speaker, the equivalent to saying to Barbados, no longer is the value of the dollar, no longer is the parity 2 Barbados dollars to 1 US dollar. It is now 4 Barbados dollars to 1 US dollar. The workers of this country at the bottom have suffered what is referred to as an internal devaluation of a significant proportion. And so, Mr. Speaker, this government has no reservations, none whatsoever. In spite of who says what, we will respond to all concerns and objections, if there are any objections. But this country has no reservations about insisting that those at the very bottom of the pay scale should be able, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central said to us, shared with us last week, to have and to be able to enjoy the notion of nutrition security. They must be able to at least eat properly in this country. And the Barbados Labour Party, this government, will ensure that we do all that we can to make sure that people can eat properly. When we came into office, the principle is the same. We recognize that those at the very bottom, and we refer then to pensioners, we said that those at the very bottom, the non-contributory pensioners, had to get an increase. And that is what this government did. Because we believe that those who are considered the most vulnerable need to be looked after. I've always been of the view that there is no need for a government if the power relationships are equal. Then we can negotiate as equals and we can live peacefully among ourselves. The only reason for a government is because there are people who can be and will be and have been taken advantage of. And somebody needs to look out for them. This government will continue to look out for those who are most vulnerable, those at the bottom of the pay scale, those who need assistance in making sure that they can keep their heads, or as we say now, their noses above the water. Essential workers in this country are not just there to make sure that we can live. We have to make sure that essential workers can live. An increase in the minimum wage will not mean that those essential workers who we so celebrated during the shutdown will be able now to afford steaks every day. But it will make sure, we will ensure that they will be able to enjoy decent food, good food, nutritious food on a daily basis. It is as basic as that. And I want to encourage Barbadians to recognize that this is more than just dollars and cents. This is making sure that people can eat a healthy meal every day and that they can feed their children in a healthy way every day. That is what an increase in the minimum wage means to ordinary people in this country. And so, Mr. Speaker, I again add my voice in full support to the bill that speaks to the Barbados Humanitarian Service Award, and after this, the Gold Award of Achievement. I believe that it is important to say thank you. As a Christian, I have said and I've often preached in my church about the 10 lepers who were all healed by Jesus. Only one returned. And my Lord asked that one, where are the other 9? Only one returned to say thanks. This government, all of us, we are saying thanks to those who put their lives on the line for us and for this country. And with those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I am obliged to you and I support these bills before this honorable chamber.
Honourable member for St. James South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to echo the sentiments that have been shared today in relation to those who've served us so well during that pandemic. And I want to salute every worker, every person who has contributed, because indeed, as was said, Barbados could not have come through without the contribution of these very important citizens, each one doing their part, doing it with commitment, doing it in a disciplined way to help our country get through one of the most difficult challenges that any country has faced in many years. I want to broaden the numbers that we recognize this morning because in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, there was so much work that the team here at Capitol did in relation to the contribution to our fight with the COVID pandemic. And I just want to share a few thoughts on what was done so that we can also salute them warmly for the work which was done. From the minister back to every ambassadorial representative across the world. Mr. Speaker, when this pandemic loosed itself on the world, Barbados had to find very quickly where we could obtain the necessary PPE, where we could get any resources that would be helpful to us in this fight, ventilators, you name it. And if we remember correctly, there was a panic across the world as countries were scrambling. People were taking shipments from each other, especially taking shipments from small developing countries that were destined to help their citizens. And Mr. Speaker, I want to add to the list of persons who should be recognized. I want to recognize the business persons who called at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and said, look, we want to help. We have connections in China. We've been able to identify a set of masks. We've been able to identify ventilators. We've been able to identify swabs. Can we help? People in our diaspora, Barbadians, recognizing that a small nation would be at risk in a pandemic such as this, called on our embassies and high commissioners, offered their assistance, offered introductions to people across the world to help us obtain that which we needed for the Ministry of Health to help us in this fight. And I want to salute them for their contribution, for their commitment to Barbados, and for their efforts to help us secure very necessary resources, and the ambassadors who work day and night without regard to time zones to help us coordinate getting those supplies into Barbados. I also want to congratulate them, Mr. Speaker, on the support that they gave the government in helping countries get their citizens back home, people who had to pass through our airport and seaport, and for their unrelenting efforts for Barbadians who found themselves stranded across the world, could not get home, couldn't get a plane, ran out of money, and they had to be nurtured, they had to be stabilized. We had to do what was necessary to assure them and assure their panicked relatives here that no stone would be left unturned to ensure that Barbadians were able to get back to home base safely. And I want to congratulate the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade for that excellent work in helping us to help Barbadians abroad. Sir, it was a time when the best phrase that you could use to describe a situation in which many people lost their heads. Many people, leaders, panicked. But when all were losing theirs, we have to salute the government of Barbados, the leadership that we had in Barbados, the Prime Minister and the members who made up the team, who worked assiduously to guide us through this very, very difficult time, and to keep their heads, to pay attention to the science, to not go off half-cocked, but to sit and think through what needed to be done. And sir, may I also add, providing guidance, support, and partnership with our members in CARICOM, because indeed in CARICOM, we were fighting this together. So I want to salute all of those who have made that possible for Barbados and to help us to be where we are today, that we can stand as proud Barbadians because we've shown what metal we have been made of. Sir, I also want to say that while there's light at the end of the tunnel, there's still more to be done. And sir, for these months, all of us as members of Parliament have had to work with our constituents, seeking to find the necessary resources to enable them to keep food on the table, to give them comfort and opportunities. Sir, it has been a very, very difficult time in many homes. And many people came under severe mental stress, not only from lockdown, not only from isolation, but because of the financial pressures that this particular pandemic created for them, as their livelihoods were removed from under them, and parents, grandparents were faced with children needing a meal and sometimes not having to give. And I want to honor the members in St. James South, the members of my team who have worked tirelessly at risk to themselves to assist in going out and discovering those who needed and help in the distribution. Sir, I could not want a better team, and I want to salute them for the contribution that they made to their neighbors and people who are still making contributions. I have people, sir, that are helping elderly people who could not get out, who could not get their medication. They've been sharing their resources with each other. They've been giving information and seeking out advice and help for those who are unable to reach the necessary governmental offices to get assistance. But, sir, while there's light now at the end of the tunnel, and I don't think there's anyone who is not relieved to know that a number of vaccines have been on the horizon that are being made available now, but as is noted, for the developed world. Our battle then is still on. Just as we had to battle, sir, for respirators, just as we had to battle for PPE, there's a battle over vaccines. And sir, Barbados has enjoined that fight. Again, the same motto, no surrender, no retreat. Sir, those vaccines are going to be important. We need to be able to access them. And in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are helping to carry the fight, whether it is at the OACP, whether it's at the UN, whether it is with the World Health Organization, with the Ministry of Health, whether it is any other organization internationally. We have been carrying the message that if all do not recover, nobody can truly recover. We cannot get the economic recovery that we need, that everyone must recover so that the world can go on and people can live their lives. And so that battle is still enjoined. But sir, there's another battle on the horizon. And again, the leadership of the Barbados Labour Party will address this matter with the same fortitude, insight, and practical wisdom. And that is the issue of vaccinations. Sir, we've seen across the media that a number of people have been skeptical. And sir, we have to take care that that does not grow here, because vaccinations are important to our health. This is how the world defeated a number of diseases that used to carry off populations all across Africa, all across Europe. And vaccinations have saved lives. But sir, there is so much misinformation that is already out in the social media, so much misinformation being spread abroad. And legitimately, people will have concerns. But I want to assure the Barbadian population that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and the team that will be working on our vaccination program will address it with the same precision as they did in coping with our quarantining and safeguarding our ports and ensuring that people had something to eat. And so for those of us in the population, I make this appeal, those of us in the medical profession, those of us who know and have better information, let us start speaking with our neighbors. Let us start speaking with those who are tentative, and to reassure them that we will present them with what is the best possible vaccine that can be used, that will be safe, that will be effective, and that they need not have any fear in so taking. And so, sir, with those few words, I would like to thank you for the opportunity and to be able to add my voice in thanking every Barbadian for what they've done to make this little nation proud and to help us to survive a pandemic that could have taken us and decimated us. But today, by the grace of God, we are here. We are still fighting, and we are still trusting in him to take us the rest of the journey. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the sitting be suspended until 2:10 this afternoon.
The question is that this honorable chair will be suspended until 2:10 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:10 p.m.